February 1944, North Atlantic, southwest of Ireland. A warship cuts through heavy gray swells at 15 knots, her hull painted in Western Approach's camouflage. She is 299 feet long, displaces less than 2,000 tons fully loaded, and sits low enough in the water that spray breaks constantly over her forward gun mount. Her armament consists of 6 4-inch guns arranged in 3 twin turrets, a single Hedgehog mortar, and 110 depth charges racked along her stern. She carries no torpedoes. She has no aircraft catapult. Her maximum speed is 19.5 knots, barely faster than some of the submarines she is hunting. The Admiralty classified her as a sloop. Fleet officers dismissed the entire class as convoy babysitters, vessels too slow for fleet actions and too lightly armed for surface engagements. Career naval officers avoided sloop commands the way ambitious executives avoid regional postings. The man on her bridge had been passed over for promotion so many times that he was scheduled for early retirement before the war began. His name was Captain Frederic John Walker. His ship was HMS Starling, pennant number U66. In the 27 days between the 29th of January and the 25th of February, Walker and his squadron would destroy 6 German submarines in a single patrol. The crew would expend all 160 depth charges aboard Starling. Walker would earn his 4th Distinguished Service Order. The signal flags raised as they returned to Liverpool would read, "Johnny Walker still going strong." By the time Walker died 5 months later, worn out by 2.5 years of relentless combat, HMS Starling would hold the Guinness World Record for the most submarines destroyed by any single vessel in history. That record has never been broken. No ship has ever come close. But the real question is, why would anyone stake the Battle of the Atlantic on a ship this slow in the first place? To understand why Starling worked, you need to understand what the Royal Navy got wrong about submarine hunting for 20 years. In 1921, a young lieutenant named Frederic John Walker volunteered to specialize in anti-submarine warfare. It was a career-ending decision. The war was over. Submarines were considered a defeated weapon. The future of naval power, everyone agreed, lay in battleships and aircraft carriers. Officers who specialized in hunting submarines were marking themselves as men without ambition. Walker did it anyway. He spent the next 18 years developing tactics for detecting and killing submerged vessels, refining techniques that senior officers dismissed as irrelevant to modern warfare. He served aboard experimental anti-submarine vessels. He wrote tactical papers that collected dust in Admiralty filing cabinets. His fitness reports described him as an outspoken officer, bored and frustrated in meaningless assignments. Promotion boards passed him over again and again. By 1939, Commander Walker was 43 years old, and his career was effectively finished. Then, Germany invaded Poland, and everything changed. The problem Walker had spent 2 decades studying was suddenly the most important tactical challenge facing the Royal Navy. German U-boats were sinking merchant shipping at catastrophic rates. Britain was an island. Everything the population needed to survive, every barrel of oil, every ton of wheat, every bullet and bandage, had to cross the Atlantic by ship. If the submarines won, Britain starved. The destroyers that dominated convoy escort duties were built for speed. They could make 30 knots or better, fast enough to chase down surface vessels and engage enemy fleets. But speed was worse than useless against submerged submarines. The acoustic detection system the British called ASDIC, which the Americans would later rename sonar, operated by sending pulses of sound through the water and listening for echoes. At anything above 15 knots, the noise of the ship's own engines drowned out the returns. A destroyer racing across the surface at 30 knots was acoustically deaf. The sloop was the opposite kind of vessel. The modified Black Swan-class that Starling belonged to displaced roughly 1,400 tons standard, less than half the weight of a fleet destroyer. Her Ford Marine diesels and Admiralty-geared turbines produced enough power for 19.5 knots under ideal conditions, but her designed cruising speed was 12 knots. At that pace, she could steam 7,500 nautical miles without refueling, more than twice the range of most destroyers. Her hull was optimized for North Atlantic conditions, wide-beamed and stable enough to serve as a steady platform for depth-charge attacks even in heavy weather. Where a destroyer carried perhaps 50 depth charges, Starling carried 110. Where a destroyer's crew raced through anti-submarine drills as one of dozens of combat scenarios they might face, Starling's crew trained for nothing else. Every man aboard knew that hunting submarines was their only purpose. Walker finally got his sea command in October 1941. He was 45 years old and had been begging Captain Creasy at the Admiralty for a ship for months. They gave him HMS Stork, a smaller sloop, and command of the 36th Escort Group defending convoy HG-76 from Gibraltar to Britain. What happened next shocked everyone. Between December 14th and December 23rd, 1941, Walker's group destroyed 5 German submarines. U-131 on December 17th, U-434 on the 18th, U-574 on the 19th, U-567 on the 21st. The engagement with U-574 was fought at such close range that Walker rammed the submarine, crushing Stork's own bows in the process. The U-boat commander, Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Gengelbach, went down with his boat. The U-567 carried particular significance. Her commander was Endras, Engelbert Endras, one of the U-boat service's most decorated aces and the former first watch officer aboard U-47 under the legendary Gunther Prien. His death was kept secret from German submarine crews for weeks. Admiral Karl Donitz, commanding the U-boat arm, wrote in his war diary that the convoy's passage represented a defeat. 30 of 32 merchant ships had reached Britain safely. 5 submarines had been lost. The exchange rate was catastrophic. Walker was promoted to captain with seniority backdated 2 years. More importantly, the Admiralty gave him exactly what he wanted. In April 1943, he took command of the 2nd Support Group, a dedicated hunter-killer formation built around 6 modified Black Swan-class sloops. Starling was his flagship. Wild Goose, Wren, Woodpecker, Cygnet, and Kite completed the squadron. The concept was simple, but it represented a fundamental shift in thinking. Escort groups stayed with convoys and fought defensively. Support groups roamed the Atlantic, hunting submarines wherever they could find them. Walker's vessels were not protecting ships. They were killing submarines. The tactics Walker developed would transform anti-submarine warfare for the rest of the war and beyond. The creeping attack placed one vessel in contact with the submarine, holding the ASDIC trace at 1,500 to 2,000 yards while directing a second vessel to approach silently from a different angle. The attacking ship crept in at minimum speed, guided entirely by radio commands from the director, until Walker gave the signal to drop. The submarine received no warning. The first indication that depth charges were falling came when they exploded. The plaster attack coordinated 3 vessels in line abreast, directed by a 4th ship maintaining contact. All 3 attackers dropped simultaneously. Any evasive maneuver by the submarine brought it under the pattern of a flanking ship. There was no escape vector. The hold down was exactly what it sounded like. If a submarine could not be killed immediately, Walker's ships maintained contact and waited. Submarines had limited battery power underwater and eventually had to surface for air. U-202 was held down for 15 hours before her commander, Kapitänleutnant Günther Poser, surfaced to find Walker's ships waiting. Rather than surrender, Poser shot himself on his own bridge. Walker drilled his captains until they could execute his tactics without orders. Pre-arranged code words replaced lengthy radio instructions. His commanders later said they could almost read his mind. On the 30th of July, 1943, Walker signaled his squadron with two words that had been used only twice before in Royal Navy history: General Chase. The phrase dated to the age of sail. Francis Drake had signaled it against the Spanish Armada in 1588. Nelson used it at the Nile in 1798. Walker used it against a wolf pack in the Bay of Biscay. The second support group destroyed two German supply submarines that day. U-462 and U-504 were both Type 14 boats, the so-called milk cows that refueled attack submarines at sea. Their loss crippled German operations in the Central Atlantic for months. Now, before we get into the patrol that earned Walker the Guinness record, if you are enjoying this deep dive into British naval history, hit subscribe. It takes a second, it costs nothing, and it helps the channel cover more stories like this one. The patrol that began on the 29th of January 1944 would become the most successful submarine hunting operation in the history of naval warfare. Walker's second support group sailed from Liverpool as distant cover for convoy ON-224. Weather conditions in the North Atlantic were brutal: gale force winds, heavy seas, temperatures hovering just above freezing, perfect conditions for hunting. U-592 was the first kill, sunk on January 31st. Walker directed the attack personally from Starling's bridge, coordinating Wild Goose and Magpie into a textbook creeping attack that placed depth charges directly on the submarine's hull. U-762 followed on February 8th, U-734 on the 9th, then U-238, also on the 9th. 3 submarines destroyed in less than 15 hours. The Admiralty would later classify it as a hat trick. U-424 went down on February the 11th. Walker's ships had been at sea for 13 days. Starling had expended every depth charge she carried. Resupply was impossible in heavy weather. On February the 19th, the group detected U-264. Kapitan Lieutenant Hartwig Lux had been underwater for 10 hours, his submarine damaged by earlier attacks and his crew approaching the limits of human endurance. When U-264 finally surfaced, seawater stood at ankle depth throughout the boat. Equipment had failed across multiple compartments. An engine room fire was spreading. Lux ordered his crew to abandon ship. 6 submarines destroyed. 1 patrol. 27 days. When the second support group entered Gladstone Dock in Liverpool on February the 25th, every ship in port sounded her horn in salute. Crowds lined the waterfront. Photographers captured Walker standing on Starling's bridge, thin and exhausted, raising his cap to acknowledge the cheers. The signal hoist flying from Starling's mast read, "Johnny Walker still going strong." It was a play on the whiskey brand, and Walker had used it before. This time, the newspapers printed it on the front page. Walker's final confirmed kill came on May 6, 1944, when the second support group destroyed U-473 after a 3-day search that began more than 300 miles from the submarine's last reported position. The hunt required the kind of instinct that could not be taught. Walker seemed to know where the submarines would run before their own commanders did. In June 1944, the second support group provided cover for the D-Day invasion fleet. 40 Allied warships operated under Walker's command. His vessels conducted 36 anti-submarine attacks in the first 3 days. Not a single U-boat penetrated the assault area. By early July, Walker had been at sea almost continuously for 6 months. He was 48 years old and looked 20 years older. His hands shook from exhaustion. He had difficulty sleeping even when conditions permitted. The ship's surgeon warned him repeatedly about the consequences of his operational tempo. On July 9, 1944, at 2 o'clock in the morning, Captain Frederic John Walker suffered a cerebral thrombosis in his cabin aboard HMS Starling. He died without regaining consciousness. The official cause was listed as aggravated by and attributable to conditions of naval service. He was buried at sea in Liverpool Bay, committed to the deep from the deck of HMS Hesperus with full naval honors. Nearly 1,000 mourners attended his funeral service at Liverpool Cathedral. Sailors of the Royal Canadian Navy, whose corvettes had fought alongside Walker's sloops throughout the Battle of the Atlantic, formed the honor guard. Admiral Sir Max Horton, Commander-in-Chief of Western Approaches, delivered the eulogy. Horton said, "All the sea of the Western Approaches shall be his tomb, and the wild Atlantic waves his monument." The numbers speak for themselves. HMS Starling, under Walker's command, destroyed 14 confirmed German submarines. The Guinness Book of Records lists 15, though post-war reassessment withdrew credit for 1 kill. No other single vessel has ever approached that figure. Walker himself commanded the destruction of 20 or 21 U-boats across his various commands, more than any other Allied officer in the war. His tactics became doctrine. The creeping attack and plaster attack were adopted throughout the Royal Navy, and eventually by the United States Navy as well. The concept of dedicated hunter-killer groups, vessels freed from convoy protection to pursue submarines aggressively, became the foundation of Cold War anti-submarine strategy. Modern anti-submarine warfare task forces trace their organizational principles directly to what Walker proved in the North Atlantic. A bronze statue of Captain Walker stands at Pier Head in Liverpool, unveiled by Prince Philip in 1998. A bust in Liverpool Town Hall bears the inscription, "The greatest sailor since Horatio Nelson." The bell from HMS Starling rings to commence meetings of Bootle Council to this day. February 1944. The North Atlantic, southwest of Ireland. A sloop cuts through heavy swells at 15 knots. She is too small to fight surface actions, too slow to chase enemy fleets, and too lightly armed to matter in the eyes of the officers who decide promotions and assign prestige commands. Her captain was written off as a dead-end specialist in a discipline nobody valued. Her entire class was dismissed as second-rate. And yet, 6 submarines destroyed in one patrol, 14 confirmed kills across the war, a record that stands 80 years later because nobody has ever managed to match it. The destroyers got the glory. The battleships got the names that school children memorize. The sloops got the job done. HMS Starling was not fast. She was not prestigious. She was not what ambitious officers requested. But she was exactly what the war required, and in the hands of a captain the Navy had almost thrown away, she became the most effective submarine killer in maritime history. That was British engineering.